Hi, this is Brian Forster coming to you from Paracas in Peru, and I want to give you an update as to the recently released DNA results of the Paracas people. Now, it's taken us 5 years since we began this process to actually get the results. It took almost 3 years to get, or 2.5, to get permission from the Ministry of Culture of Peru, who we worked with very closely, especially with archaeologist Ruben Soto, in order to have the DNA testing approved by the government. A total of 18 skulls was tested, and results came back from 12. The DNA was so badly degraded after 2,000 to 3,000 years that of the 58 samples of 18 skulls, we got results from 12 of the skulls from 2 different laboratories, one in Canada, the Lakehead University, and another one at UCLA in California. A third lab was also utilized at Santa Cruz, University of California, but they stated that of the, I think, 18 samples they were given, no results were forthcoming. We're not sure if that's true, or whether the results were so bizarre that they decided to hide them. So, in what I can basically tell you is that all Native American people of 100% Native ancestry are supposed to be and were of the haplogroups A, B, C, and D. So this is one of the Paracas elongated skulls. This is one that we believe is natural in shape. And as I turn it, you will see the complexity of the design. You see all that amazing curvature, and basically there's a depression here where the 2 hemispheres would be. The eye sockets are very large, and there's a lack of a sagittal suture here. So the results that we got, 4 of the elongated skulls were of haplogroup B, which relates to the fact that there was Native American ancestry involved, but the other ones were not. And the most common haplogroups that showed up were U2E and also H, H1A, and H2. If you look at where the most prevalent percentage of U2E and the H1s are, it is in between the Black and Caspian Seas, as in the Caucasus Mountains. And so that's very intriguing. What I can also share with you is what I believe was the migrational pattern, because these people, like some indigenous people of the Caspian area and Black Sea area, were and are dark red-haired and also very light skin and green eyes. And this seems to correspond as well with the elongated skulls. So I believe what happened was about 3,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Paracas decided to leave the area because they were being invaded by someone. And so they traveled south through Iraq and Iran to the Persian Gulf, and there they wound up sailing eastwards and eventually found their way to the coast of Peru. There are different routes they could have used. They could have gone through Hawaii. They also could have gone through New Zealand, but then they wound up at the largest natural bay on the coast of Peru, which is Paracas, and that's where they decided to live because there was basically no one living there. They could live in peace. Hi, this is Brian Forster coming to you from Paracas in Peru, and this is part 2 of a 5-part series about the elongated skulls DNA results from Paracas. Now, in part 1, I briefly discussed the anomalies that were found in a number of the elongated skulls. 18 were tested, and good results came from about 12 or 13 of them. And the most commonality that I can glean from this is that the occurrence of the U2E haplogroup and the occurrence of H haplogroup, including possibly H1 and H1A, maybe even H2, mean that the point of origin for the Paracas would appear to be somewhere in the Caucasus area, in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Now, after doing a little more research, I've been able to focus on more the Black Sea area and actually Crimea. Now, this may seem strange, but the DNA does seem to point in that direction. And another interesting thing is that the largest elongated skulls in the world are found in Paracas, Peru. And then the second largest elongated skulls, which look very much similar to the Paracas, are found in the Black Sea area and in the Crimea. The Paracas culture lived between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, and those elongated skulls found in the Crimea, again, are also around 2,000 plus years old. So the timeline is very similar. Now, I've also shown photographs in the beginning of this video. All of those are from the Black Sea area. And then also, if we try to look at the migration pattern, which I show maps of, it would appear that these people were displaced. Initially, they headed south into the Persian Gulf. Then they were able to catch winds and currents and travel eastwards, and then catch what is called the countercurrent into the Pacific. That could have taken them as far east as Colombia and Ecuador, and then simply by waiting for the winds to change from predominantly south, coming from the south to coming from the north, they could have easily sailed down the coast of South America and found the largest natural bay in Peru, which is exactly at Paracas. Also notice the photos I showed you of the textiles, because the first two textiles are of the Paracas, the third one is from the Crimea area. And notice the very complicated coloration and tight weaving. The Paracas were the finest weavers in the Americas. And how could this be that they were a crude culture and then all of a sudden they developed all of these incredible colors? I think that is a key that links them back to the Crimea area. Not to mention the elongated heads. The ones in the Black Sea I don't think have been DNA tested yet, but that's something I would definitely like to pursue. And then the other thing is that there are thousands of date palm trees located here in Paracas. When you travel north towards Lima, they disappear. When you travel south towards Nazca, they disappear. So the focal point of these date palms are here in Paracas, and nobody uses them to this day. They don't eat the dates, they don't use the palm fronds for anything. In the Middle East, the date palm is one of the most, by far, important plants. And I believe that as these people were escaping south towards the Red Sea, they may have collected some of the dates and nuts, knew their importance, and took them with them, or seeds, took them with them on their eastward journey and planted them here in order to utilize the products. So that is part 2. And then in part 3, we're going to get into probably Rick Woodward, who's an anthropologist who studied the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters your skull. It's much farther back than it should be in the Paracas skulls, and that indicates a genetic anomaly. That the foramen magnum being so far back is because the skull was so large and kind of leaning backwards that the foramen magnum genetically was there in order to keep the skull erect. I'll also be doing another video about the work of Dr. Michael Alday, who is a medical doctor, who looks at the genetic differences and physical differences, and then also Dr. Malcolm Warren, who's a chiropractor.
Please focus on what's called the foramen magnum, where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull. Now, first of all, in a normal skull, there is what is called this sagittal suture in red. But it seems to be completely lacking in what we call the natural elongated skulls of Paracas. Also, the foramen magnum of a normal skull is located at the balance point near the center. And in the Paracas skulls, it's physically way to the back. That is genetic. Note here with this baby skull that the neck is at the very back. Very unusual. And we were very fortunate to have Mr. Eric von Daniken go through the DNA results recently, and he's completely fascinated. He visited our Paracas Museum and will be returning many times.
Hi, this is Brian Forrester coming to you from Paracas in Peru, and this is DNA update of the Paracas number 3 in a series. I'm not sure how many there will be, probably 5 or 6 parts, but this is part 3, and this is looking at physical anomalies of the Paracas elongated skulls. And the work is in this book, which will be available at the end of the video, or the email address. And this work is was done by Dr. Michael Alday, who is an American physician, Dr. Malcolm Warren, who is an American chiropractor, and Rick Woodward, who is a physical anthropologist. Now, this is what we call cranial deformation. You can tell the volume of the skull is that of a normal human, and the forehead and the back of the skull have been flattened. So this is what cranial deformation on the coast of Peru looks like. This, on the other hand, is what we call a natural Paracas skull. You can see the volume is greater than the previous skull I showed you, and the whole shape is much more complex than simple cranial deformation. And so we think this person was born with an elongated skull. Also, as you saw in the photos before, at the beginning of the video, the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal cord column, vertebrae enter the bottom of the skull, is positioned at a place of balance, the balance point, which is an obvious evolutionary thing. But the anomaly in the Paracas elongated skulls that we believe are natural, and even some with headboarding, their foramen magnum, as you can see here, is at the back of the skull. So that is a genetic trait. You cannot change the position of the foramen magnum simply by binding a skull, because trying to do that, especially with the baby, you would wind up killing that person or that child. And so this is one of the genetic characteristics of what we call a natural elongated skull. Also, the suture lines. Here is the suture running across this way, but there is no sign of the sagittal suture whatsoever. And notice the curvature here, as if the two hemispheres are being represented, or the shaping was done by nature in order to have this dip inside of here. Also, the eye sockets are up to 50% larger than normal. And these bones in the back, these tiny bones here, are not in a normal human being. These are called Inca bones. They are found in the royal Inca people, but also clearly here in the Paracas as well. So that is another genetic characteristic, and that may in fact link the elongated skulls of Paracas, Peru, who died out 2,000 years ago, with the rise of the Inca culture. It's quite possible that the Inca and the Paracas shared ancestry. It's said in the Spanish Chronicles that the royal Inca people had reddish hair, and of course the Paracas people also had reddish hair. So that is your update for now. I will be doing at least 2 more parts. In one, we'll be looking at the blood type differences between Native Americans and the Paracas. And also, in another part, I'll go into a more detailed description of the differences between Native American DNA, as in haplogroups, and those found in the Paracas. Thank you. This is the brilliant artist Marcia K. Moore of the United States, and she is going to do facial reconstruction.
of this Paracas skull called Cinnamon that died about 2,000 years ago. So she starts out by doing computer imaging of it in 3D. And of course the work in the beginning is kind of crude and simplistic, but then she starts to layer it. Cinnamon was a Paracas woman who died at the age of about 16, 2,000 years ago. And this is Marcia's computer image of what she thinks that Cinnamon looked like, with variations in terms of hairstyle. We know that Cinnamon probably had dark reddish hair, which is typical of the Paracas royalty. And here she's experimenting with jewelry, and here even basing it on people who had elongated heads about 100 years ago. And so that is the computer work that she has done. And now, here's a casting of a true Paracas skull. Again, this is Cinnamon. And now she's starting to build up from the casting itself, fleshing it out in 3D. You can see she's put eyeballs in. And gradually, layer upon layer, Cinnamon comes back to life. She hasn't quite finished it yet, but she is at the final stages of completing Cinnamon. Again, the addition of more layers, muscle tissue, and now working on the finer details. This is the Cinnamon skull that was in the previous YouTube video. And for at least 7 years, I've been sending Mark LaPlume photographs of elongated skulls, not only from Paracas, but from other parts of the world. And Mark has done faithful reproductions based upon his artistic talent of what these ancient people who lived 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, what they looked like. Now Mark has done this free of charge, and again he has made at least 2,000 drawings based on some photographs that he's found from ancient collections, again, as well as those sent to him by me and by other people. What he does enjoy having are multiple views, so that way he can get the proper curvature of the face, etc. And here we see examples of his work. Now Mark has a Facebook page called Root Race Research, and in that you can find possibly all 2,000 of the drawings that he has done. Now, as you can see from Mark's perspective, the ancient Paracas people were not very Native American looking like. They look more European-ish, but that is his impression. That's not some kind of influence that I tried to make on him. And now with the recent DNA evidence, results that we've received from 18 different Paracas skulls, there are indeed European and or Eurasian haplogroups associated with the ancient Paracas people, which according to standard academia should not be there. But data does not lie. So please check out his Facebook page of Root Race Research, and though you may think that this is not drawn from an actual skull, it is, because several of these have been found not only in the Paracas area, but other parts of Peru.
Hi, this is Brian Forster coming to you from Paracas in Peru. This is part 6 of a 7-part YouTube series about the elongated skull DNA research of Paracas in Peru. And this part is about the team of people who were involved in this process. There were 10 important people involved, and I wish to give a brief description of each and what their role was. Of course, I was the coordinator in Peru itself. I've been studying the elongated skulls of Paracas for about 10 years, and so I was the one coordinating between the Ministry of Culture, specifically Ruben Garcia Soto, who is a leading archaeologist for the Ministry of Culture in Inca, Peru, and making local organizational things like transport, etc., hotels, etc. And I did this along with the vital assistance of my wife Irene. And then in the United States, the main coordinator by far was Dr. L.A. Marzulli. L.A. made several trips down, sometimes with team members, sometimes with simply one camera person. And if he was not involved, there's no way this process would have reached its climax, which it has now. He was responsible for coordinating with the 2 DNA labs located in North America. Also, he was able to get the $100,000 which was utilized and required in order to be able to do the proper DNA testing in 2 of the 10 top DNA laboratories in the world. He did this as well with Mondo Gonzalez, who is an American archaeologist. Mondo wrote up the report at the end. He was involved in the sampling here in Peru, both at the Inca Museum and the Senior Juan Navarro Museum in Paracas. So Mondo was a very vital person to have. Then we also had Chase Klosky, who was responsible for making sure that the environments, both at the Inca Museum and also the Paracas Museum of Senior Juan, were as sterile as possible. She was the one who took the samples as soon as they were removed from the skulls and put them into perfect sterile packages, labeled them, packaged them, and brought them to the United States. So without Chase's help, we would get a lot of accusations of contamination, but both laboratories said that the work Chase did was superior to what was required. So hats off to her. Then we also had Richard Shaw, who documented the entire process. He came down multiple times, sometimes just with L.A. Marzulli, sometimes with the team. He recorded all of the DNA sampling, the locations such as the Chongo Cemetery, and other places as well. So without his documentation, we wouldn't have the full evidence. So Richard did a brilliant job. And also then Dr. Malcolm Warren, an American chiropractor, Dr. Michael Alday, a medical physician in the United States of 35 years of experience, and Rick Woodward, who is an anthropologist in the United States. The 3 of them were mainly studying the abnormalities or differences of the elongated skulls of Paracas, Peru, as compared to normal skulls and also other skulls of other cultural groups of this area. And they were able to figure out that the lack of the sagittal suture here is probably a genetic abnormality, not the idea that it was prematurely closed or calcified. It seemed to simply not be there according to them. Also, the eye sockets appear to be larger than normal, and the foramen magnum, which again is where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull, the position of it is much farther back than is normal. And so all 3 were able to figure out that there's no way that the movement of the foramen magnum backwards like that could be the result of cranial deformation. It has to be genetic. Also, the opening of the foramen magnum appears to be oval and not round as it is in Homo sapiens sapiens, and that's another abnormality. And I believe all 3 concluded that the necks of the Paracas elongated skulls would be longer and thinner than normal. So those are the factors that they figured out. And also, of course, Ruben, the archaeologist in Peru, in Inca, was vital because we had to do this with the Peruvian Ministry of Culture. There was no way that we could take even little powdered samples of Paracas material outside of Peru for testing without the approval of the Ministry of Culture of Peru, and without Ruben's assistance, that would have been almost impossible. So my personal thanks to the other 9 members of this group that worked together very well, and hats off to all of them for their expertise. Now, in part 7, what I'm going to do is get into a more detailed discussion of the actual DNA haplogroups that were found, because many of them were not indigenous to the Americas and were not present supposedly in South America technically before the first Spanish arrived in the 1500s. So this means that 2,000 plus years ago there were people called the Paracas, a very complex DNA background, that were living on the coast of Peru. I'll also discuss blood type samples that were taken, and supposedly prior to the arrival of the Europeans in the 16th century, all native people, especially of Peru and South America in general, were supposed to be 100% blood type O, and this is not the case. So I'll get into that in the final 7th chapter of this series. Thank you so much for your interest. Hi, this is Brian Forrester coming to you from Paracas in Peru, and this is the summary of the DNA testing of the Paracas elongated skulls and related abnormalities found by medical professionals in the skulls themselves. Now, the academics that we are associated with here in Peru and elsewhere, their prediction for the results of the elongated skull testing, of which we had 18 different skulls tested, was that the haplogroups that would be found would be A, B, C, or D, because those are the haplogroups of the Native American people whose ancestors crossed over the Bering Land Bridge 12,000 plus years ago. We have sent the data out to different academics. Those that wish to examine the data are welcome to contact us in order to do peer review should they wish. But I think they will be somewhat disturbed with the fact that some of the haplogroups of the mitochondrial DNA that came back were in fact, a few were B, which is typical Native American, but other ones that showed up included U2E, K, J, and H. And the commonality of those are they were all found around the Black Sea and Crimea area. Also, the largest elongated skulls in the world, aside from the Paracas, have been found in the Black Sea and Crimea area. So I'm now working on that relationship. There must have been some kind of maritime movement 3,000 plus years ago from that area, is my thesis. As regards the physical abnormalities, as I said in previous videos, the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull, is at the center point in Homo sapiens sapiens, and it is quite round in shape, but the ones of the Paracas elongated skulls are significantly to the back and oval and narrower, so they probably had longer, thinner necks than Homo sapiens sapiens, and that of course is a genetic abnormality that cannot be explained by cranial deformation. That was confirmed by the medical experts that we had in this book, which is available from LA at lamarzulli.net. And also, it will be explored by other medical professionals, such as my radiologist friend Ken. And then also there are things called foramen ovali, I believe they're called, which are up and inside here in the skull. That is where nerve and blood flow comes out to feed the face, and that gives us our facial expressions. They seem to be absent in the Paracas elongated skulls, which means their facial expressions would have been very different from us, which again is an abnormality. Also, the two holes in the back of the skull in the Paracas were for blood and nerve flow because of the elongated nature of the skull, and not in the book, but the blood types are very curious. 12 different samples of ancient Paracas elongated skull blood was tested, a paper was written, the paper was then removed by other academics because it doesn't conform to standard or the standard story of history. 100% of Native American people who are 100% Native American genetically, from Mexico all the way down to the southern tip of South America, were and are supposed to be blood type O, 100%. But the results of the Paracas were actually of 14 samples. Blood type A, 28.5%, blood type B, 7.1%, blood type AB, which is the rarest on the planet, 21.4%, and only 43% were blood type O. So Will Hart and I, who is an author, will be writing a paper for Nexus Magazine about this. What we can basically say is that the Paracas were a very complex genetic being existing 2,000 plus years ago on the coast, and the genetic anomalies are very curious because, again, they should only be A, B, C, and D, but there seems to be a very powerful Eurasian component to their DNA. I don't know if academics will bother writing papers about this, whether they'll attack us. The results are the results. Data is data, fact is fact. And so that is the summary of the story.